So you'll be able to zoom to a place on a map, perhaps look for your house, see what's going on around there, what resources are available there. It will be a community-owned and generated or history and photographic archive. So there will be a layer of information on top of what we're including that will be provided by members of the public, so you can all get involved in sharing your knowledge and understanding of the city. It will be a platform for heritage data and resources to be made available into the future. So the plan is that this resource will continue to grow over time with people's input to that. And of course, we want this to be a free and unrestricted resource for people. So community access to that will be completely free of charge. So rather than complicate matters and go over ground that we've already covered, next slide, I just thought I'd talk a little bit about a bit more detail about the things that we will be making available via the platform. So this is a screenshot of Know Your Place Bristol. So you can see there that you've got your modern base map on the right-hand side of the bar there. I'm pointing at my screen and that doesn't help you at all, does it? There we go, there's my cursor. So that's the modern map. You've got a historic map that can be pulled across like a curtain, as Pete would describe it, across the modern map. And then on the right-hand side here, you've got a whole list of resources and information layers that can be switched on and off that map. So those little green sort of diamond shapes on the map there are points of information that you can click on for further information there. So that's just to give you an idea of the sort of basic outline of what Know Your Place Worcester will look like as well. And I will ask Pete to talk to us a little bit more about some of those resources shortly, but just to outline the things that we've already got lined up. So first of all, we will be including, in addition to the modern base mapping layers, we'll be including a number of historic information layers and historic maps. So this is one of my favourite maps. It's a really great, detailed bit of cartography for the city. This is the first edition Ordnance Survey map from 1886, and it's drawn at 1 to 500 scale, so it's incredibly detailed. So you can see that's a sort of larger shot of it there. And if I click on, there we go. I've zoomed in a little bit more there, and you can just see just how detailed that mapping is. If you can see, so we're at the north edge of the cathedral precinct here. So there's College Street going down in a diagonal line there. Litt Street, which many of you will have heard about and seen the excavations at Litt Street a couple of years back. But what's really lovely about this is as you get in closer, that you can see things like the pub names. So you've got the Punch Bowl pub there, the Lich Gate. So there's the Lich Gate passing through from College Street into Litt Street there, and little details like trees, probably in the positions that they were actually at that time. You don't generally see that on modern mapping now. And even things like the thickness of the wall around the cathedral precinct. So it's incredibly detailed of mapping, that one. This map, however, doesn't cover the full geographical extent of the city today. So in order to do that, we also need to include our 1 to 2500 mapping. So this is, again, from a similar date, the first edition Ordnance Survey, but drawn at 1 to 2500. And this covers the whole of the country. So one of the ladies that got in touch and advanced the workshop asked about geographical coverage, and just to reiterate that Know Your Place Worcester currently is planned for Worcester City and not the wider county. So the mapping that we will include will go out to the boundary extents where that's available. So there we are. There's the 1 to 2500, and just to show you the detail of that. So it's still a relatively good detailed bit of mapping, not quite as detailed as the 1 to 500, but you can see that that's actually a really useful bit of kit there. Just going back again, I will also say that we will be including the Epoch 4 Ordnance Survey mapping from 1940, and that will be a really useful sort of base map of historic mapping, because it will be a good comparison with a lot of the historic photos that we've got. So those date from the early 1950s onwards. So a lot of the kind of the streetscape of the city will be very similar between those maps and the photographs. So to talk a little bit about the photographic content that we'll be including, I mentioned already the Worcester City Conservation Photograph Collection. This is a collection of many thousands of photos. So we have around 35,000 photographs in the collection. A good proportion of those date from 1951, so quite a comprehensive survey was done of the city centre at that time. So you can get a real feel for how the city looked in 1951. And this is a lovely image of the bottom end of Broad Street. And you can, if you've got good eyes, you can just see that there's a policeman there with a spike on the top of his helmet. We'll also be including the Marsden collection, which is our collection from the Chief Public Health Inspector of Worcester during the slum clearance times in the late 50s into the 1960s. And this is a really evocative collection. It's got a lot more images with people in them, actually. But you can really see some of the conditions that people were living in and the state of housing that was largely condemned after the 1957 Housing Act, which required that housing was fit to live in, heaven forbid. So aside from those sort of key photographic layers, as I've mentioned, one really core part of Know Your Place Worcester will be the community layer. And this is where local people can contribute their own material to the site. If you came along to our first workshop a few weeks ago, Pete did a really lovely demonstration of how that works. And it's a simple form. You click on the app, a form pops up. You can upload an image or an audio track or a document and include your own information on the layer there. So there's huge potential for that just to expand and grow over time. The photograph that I've included there is an image that a member of the public sent to us in response to the beginning of our project launch. And that's a photo of her in 1959, I think, planting a tree to commemorate 5 years of Dines Green Primary School. So a really lovely image there. A few of the suggestions that have come forward. So I've had a few emails from people that haven't been able to join us today, and we've had conversations with people going through the project. But one of those is the suggestion of a sporting memories layer that's come from Glyn Harding, and a few people have supported the idea of this. It seems to be quite a popular thing to include. So obviously a lot of people through their lives have been involved with sporting clubs in the city, lots of memories associated with that, lots of images of football teams and cricket teams and sporting venues across the city. So it's looking like there's enough of an appetite for that to be a layer in its own right. So that will be really exciting, and that will also feed into the information packs that will sit on the Worcester Life Stories platform. And another suggestion that's come forward has been around industries. So I've called it Worcester at Work here to cover all sorts of things. And David Nash, that is working on the Glove Affair project for Museums Worcestershire, has actually got a number of volunteers that are recording gloving sites around the city. So that's certainly something that we would look to incorporate there. And then finally, obviously the wider historic environment record, we record archaeological sites, historic buildings and monuments across the city. So we'll be looking to represent that in some way as a layer on Know Your Place Worcester. So those are some of the things that we've already been thinking around. Just to give you a nice image of one of the resources from the historic environment record here. This is one of our historic building applications from the late 19th century. And that actually shows plans for a proposed loom shed for the carpet manufacturer Webbs, who are based in Deansway, or Deansway as we know it today anyway. And then what I liked about this one is that it also highlights another little glove company that was there next door in Copenhagen Street. So it was just a nice little resource and an idea of the sorts of things that we could potentially incorporate. So I'm going to stop screen sharing now, and let's see, how do we stop screen sharing? Please stop screen. There we go, stop sharing. There's a big button that says stop sharing. So I'm going to ask Pete if you can share your screen, Pete. You're going to bring up Know Your Place, aren't you, for us to look at? Because what I'd like to do now is just really invite everyone to have a bit of a discussion around the sorts of material that you'd like to see. Ooh. Feedback. Are you there, Pete?
Yeah, I'm here. I hope you can see that screen now. I'm just started sharing, and that you can see, well, pretty much what Sheena's just described, really. And you'll also be able to see where I live, because I'm working from home, like most of us, and so it's actually highlighting where I am sat on the map at the moment, because you got the location switched on. So so if you want to hunt me down, you know where I am. You probably can, don't you? So I'm on Lower Places, Bristol, Montpellier. I talked around a lot about Know Your Place last time and how it works and so on. So hopefully some of you have already had an explore of the site, and so none of this will be that new to you now. But just because of what Sheena just spoke about a minute ago, just to give you an indication of the type of mapping that will eventually be on the version Know Your Place.
Sorry, Pete, I'm getting a lot of feedback. I'm just wondering if everyone can go on mute while someone's presenting. Is that possible?
Is that better now? That sounds better, yeah. So as Sheena was talking about the 1 to 2,500 map that will be on the Worcester Know Your Place, that's what pokes out the side here on the Bristol Know Your Place. And I'm fairly certain, because you'll be getting the mapping from National Library of Scotland or the British Library, it will be this pink coloured version. So you'll see all the buildings picked out in pink on the map there. And just to give you an indication of what that looks like on the screen, you can zoom in to that level of detail. So that's 1 to 750, which is a greater scale than the original mapping in this instance. But as with the larger scale map that Sheena talked about, you can see that there's some indication of the trees and bushes and so on in people's gardens here. But in addition to that map on the Bristol version, we've also got the 1 to 500 map, which Sheena mentioned, which then has that larger, clearer details. So although that's originally surveyed at 1 to 500, it's presented on Know Your Place at 1 to 750, which is the same zoom levels that you get in Google Maps. But even at 1 to 750, you can still see the details here. And just to point out, there's not much detail. I'm living on this side of the street, and there's not much detail on this side. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a second, actually. It's because these are freshly built. So when this is surveyed in around about the mid 1880s, these houses, the one I am in here, it's only just been built, and no one is actually living in these houses at that date. And I've done some research that I'll show you in a second, because one of the things I was doing in lockdown is actually do story maps. And one of the story maps I did a story map for our street, but I'll go into a bit more detail about it in a bit. But yeah, as Sheena said, it's a gorgeous map, the 1 to 500 map. Just all the trees in here, the names of the buildings, and so forth. But let's zoom out a bit so you get a bit more sense of this actual area. And again, what Sheena was talking about in terms of these green diamonds on the map, just to remind you, like I said last time, when you click on that, you can get a little pop-up comes up about what is someone's uploaded here. In this case, it's right opposite my house, so I uploaded that photograph, and it shows what I can see out the window. If I turn to my left here, that's the view from my window, essentially. So it just means that people can share this type of that's obviously a modern street view, but you can also get historic photos. So this is further down my street in the 1980s, when the bottom end of the street was semi-derelict. And in fact, if I go to another image, which I recently uploaded over here, you'll actually get someone from the royal family visiting when the local primary school was opened, and we had Prince Charles visiting, and there he was shaking the head teacher at the time, her hand there, and in the background, that's those same houses that were derelict on Lower Cheltenham Place. They are now restored and a Grade 2 listed, and they're a housing association in all those in that terrace there now. So just giving an indication of the type of material that will come in, and that is just on one street. And as you see from the story map I share in a bit, the point is heritage is everywhere. It is absolutely everywhere. No matter what type of neighbourhood you are in, there are stories to be shared, and that's what as a resource like Know Your Place and the Worcester Life Stories project will demonstrate without question. And it's what makes these things so exciting and so interesting for everybody. In terms of how we have developed this, I think I also talked about last time, on the right-hand side, we have got these information layers. That's also what Sheena was talking about. So something like, say, the sporting lives in Worcester, that could easily appear as an information layer on the right-hand side as one on the menu there. And these have all been created by volunteers helping us build this resource. And Sheena mentioned the conservation photographs, for example, and there's a Trelawney Ross photographs layer there. Those are photographs that actually came out of the conservation department within what is now my team and the council. And these appear, when you switch that layer on, these appear as little yellow diamonds on the map. And you click on those and you get the photograph that conservation officer was taking of these. Well, I live in a conservation area, of these conservation areas in the 1970s, 1980s. This is 1982. The bottom right-hand side, you've got his handwriting saying November 1982 there. And that's a building that's just off the bottom of my street there. So that was being added by a volunteer to that resource to build the whole collective of information that we have on here. Further down the list, I will just show you here. So that what you've got initially on here, the green diamond, again, I mentioned this last time, that's the community layer. And that's down the bottom here, you've got public contributions, and we've got community layer here. Those are the green diamonds. I can switch them off. The other layer that's down here in that public contributions, again, Sheena mentioned these earlier. We have oral histories also on. We can actually turn those on, and when you click in here, it will link you through to be able to listen to someone talking about that part of, in this case, my street. But they will appear across the map in various parts where they have been collected. And we've just been collecting oral histories, so we've been able to add quite a few for this area. The other thing, Sheena also mentioned films. We also have films on the website here, film archives. Unfortunately, we haven't got any from around here, but if I zoom out, we'll find them on the map, and you'll see they're also just like the oral histories. When you click on there, you'll be able to watch a film from the link within the further information. And these are films from our archives. I won't switch that on just in case I absolutely blow the bandwidth, because I know my partner's downstairs in another meeting at the moment, and I don't want to don't want to cause trouble. So I don't know whether, I mean, I'm happy to keep this fairly loose and field questions and so on around these things. What I will just point out, one of the things I think one of the aims was for today was to look at the kind of guidance around this website, because I talked a lot about how it works. Most of us are familiar with Google Maps. It works just like a Google map. The complication with a site like Know Your Place is because it can have so much data on here, whether it's the historic maps that you can pull across like this, or those information layers. I mean, you'll see on Bristol's one, we've got umpteen layers now. It's how to provide information in a user-friendly way. I mean, we hope that it's as intuitive as it can be, but even with that, where it is intuitive, it still needs that guidance, those guidance documents. So we've not long ago we added this help and information layer section onto the menu. So when you click on that, it actually comes up with links through to our Know Your Place West site. So to give people a bit of that helping hand, if you like, about how you actually get in there. I always hope that people are just going to explore it and see what they find. There's a bit of discovery going on. But at the same time, I know also with computers and websites, there is this bit of apprehension sometimes about, well, what can I do? What can't I do? And so we try and answer those questions through providing links to further information. So when you click on those links from the menu, it will take you through to this website where there is like you see, a step-by-step guide about how to do these things on the site. The sort of things that I'm just doing randomly, far too quickly, probably. The other thing, if you do want to listen to more of me, I think I might have said this last time, when you go to the Explore the Maps point on there, and this is something that you might find interesting, and also linking through to the Worcester Life Stories thing, I'm just thinking now about this, is that there is a little video on here where you can play that and you'll hear me talking about how to use the website. Like I say, unfortunately, you do have to listen to me, but actually you don't have to listen to me. You put the sound down and it's all subtitled, so you can just read what I'm saying. So that might make life a bit more pleasant. But it's might be, those little videos might be one way of a kind of a very user-friendly way of engaging with the site, and particularly if they're actually linked to the stories that you see on Worcester Life Stories and the sort of stories that are appearing on Know Your Place. It might be quite a nice way of doing it. I certainly did one of these for our street, linked to those oral histories I just showed you, linked to the images that I've just shown you. And we had a kind of YouTube film just like this one, general one for Know Your Place, did one just for our street. And I think people found it quite useful. Just, sorry.
No, carry on, Pete. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, so that was just to kind of like look at these sort of, and like you'll see on this list on the side here, there are a whole range of different things to look at. So it takes you through the base maps, the information layers, and so on. But I will, just before I open it up to sort of like further kind of wider, broader discussions around those things. Oh, yeah. I will just show you, because I love these. I love showing these things, really. So I mentioned the story map, and I did one for our road, and I'm in a way this hints at what might be possible with Worcester Life Stories, because this is where Know Your Place itself is almost like a signpost. It's got so much information on there. Like I was saying, it's actually quite difficult to get to the bits of information you might find interesting or useful. And these story maps that we're creating for Bristol cut through those data layers, those historic map layers, on thematic lines or specific storylines. So in this instance, it's purely just my street. Again, coming back to that point, heritage stories are everywhere. Let's take one street and explore all of those stories that would appear on that one street. And here, what I've done is basically take you down on a tour of this street from one end of the street to the other, trying to link through all those different resources that are on Know Your Place, such as the oral history. So there'll be someone, not me, talking about Lower Cheltenham Place, but someone who lives further down the road talking about Lower Cheltenham Place. And then going through, I mean, there's lots of lovely ways in which you can present the data in story maps, as you will better do in the Worcester Life Stories application. But here, just like you can draw the maps across in Know Your Place, you can embed what looks like a bit of Know Your Place within the story map and have that exploration about how a place has changed. In this case, that's an 1828 map over the top of the modern base map, and you can just see the origins of the road. Where did it come from? Why was it being developed in the first place? And as you go down through the story, you have the historic images that we've got on Know Your Place. So that image is on the map further down the road over here. If I walked out into the street there and looked down the street, that's the building I would be able to see from the middle of the road, looking down the road. And there it is in the early 20th century. With the shop I go to when I want some milk, it's just around the corner there. That's my road coming off there. And then takes you through each one of the properties as you walk down the street, with a map on the left-hand side and text about what that building is from the earliest period. And as I mentioned earlier, so that's the end of the street photograph. What I discovered when I was doing this research is the reason why those gardens has got so little detail in them on the 1880s plan is because actually most of these houses down this street weren't actually occupied, or certainly don't appear in the census until 1901. So it's the 1901 census where you start to see who's living in these houses here. And so I actually went through the 1901 census and added those details for every single one of the houses down the road. And when you start to look at it in that level of detail, the stories are just coming out, almost literally out of the woodwork sort of thing. And it's just a fascinating way to look at just this on a very, very individual level. I find it fascinating, but then of course I would, it's my job. But it just hints at the possibilities and how exciting something like Worcester Life Stories can be when it starts to talk about sporting history or talk about the natural environment or wherever where you want to go. It's it's really, really exciting. I'm just going to take you down. I won't take you to my house, but I'll just take you down through some of these things. One of the things just from the census alone, and it talks about who is living in this street, what are their professions in 1901, and you'll see it's a street of families, it's multiple generations in one house. A house like the one I'm sat in here will have father, mother, many children, quite often, and children as young as babies up to the age of in their 20s, and the 20-year-olds are still living with their parents and going out quite often doing the same profession as their mum or dad, normally the dad. And that's standard life in a household in 1901 on this street. And the same will be true in Worcester, absolutely guaranteed. So you talked about glovers. Here, it's, yes, you've got dressmakers here, but there's a lot of people working in the chocolate industry along our street. There's a lot of people making boots. So the boot industry is big in here. Again, it will be in Worcester, but lots and lots of people making boots on our road in 1901. There are many stories. I will share this in the chat before we finish, so you can explore this yourself, because it just, like I say, gives you that little hint about the sort of stories you can, just from what looks like really, really basic data, you will suddenly get all these stories. I'm waffling.
Thanks, Pete. No, it's really, really helpful just to see the possibilities of the platform and the sorts of directions that we might go. I suppose it'd be really nice now to just open it up and sort of ask people what they think, what sorts of things you might like to see included in the platform for Worcester, whether you have any particular research projects you've been working on yourself that we could potentially pull into the site. Opening it up really. If you want to just to say, if you do want to speak, if you unmute yourself and then just mute yourself again afterwards, just so that we don't get that problem with feedback. Anyway.
It might help to. So Pete, are you able to close the sharing so we can see everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Stop sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just put up a second there. What was on the screen briefly was we've got a volunteer adding the 1881 census data for the city, and I just thought I'd just flag that up.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Thanks, Pete. There's a few happy smiling faces. Anyone want to kick us off?
Can I ask Pete a question? This is Sue.
Hi, Sue.
Hello. Pete, I just wanted to ask you if you have links to the census returns or the parish records in the sort of way that you'd look at them in Ancestry, so that you could click on a street and see the actual census return there.
Yeah, that's what I was just showing then very briefly. Someone is adding that data to the website at the moment for the 1881 census. So I might just pop back there a minute just to show you how that looks. So he's actually adding each property on to the map for the 1881 census. So that's a whole cluster in Redland where he's done that. So if I zoom into there, you'll see the level of detail in there. And what he's done is actually enter the census information for that house, but he's also added a link to, I can't see that very well, within, actually it's not coming up on there, I must check, must fix that, Paul. There's a link within each of the streets to a PDF for the street record, for every property on the street, you'll better get from a PDF from that point there, or you should do if the link was there, but the link's missing for some reason at the moment. But that's the way that's supposed to work. But that is a work of a volunteer, which is he is spending years doing this, and so. But it will become, already is a very rich resource for certain parts of the city. But you can see how far he's got with that, and considering that most of Bristol is a very Victorian city. But yeah, this is as far as he's got. There's other bits and pieces. If anyone saw House Through Time, this House Through Time is down here on the map, the David Sugar program, and so he did that element on the census because of that work, that program being on.
Thank you, Pete. That sounds great.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Can I just ask that volunteer? How are they actually doing that work? Are they doing that work remotely? Are they accessing GIS from home, or how are they doing that?
It's all remotely, and the records are added in the same way as the other records are added using the public contribution function. So he does his research on Ancestry or whatever, and then adds the records onto Nameplace in a normal way.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Pete. So I mean, just looking at the sort of the opportunities for volunteers to get involved, if there are particular sort of subject areas that people would like to contribute to the site, then that's a really lovely way of being able to engage with the site and the project going forward. Have we got any other sorry, Shirley.
I was just to say how wonderful it would be if you could automate that process. It's just an observation and a comment of pulling in the census data. And that's very satisfying to do, and I can imagine doing that myself.
I assume when you say automate it, I mean, one of the things is we're being a little bit naughty taking that data, because essentially it's Ancestry's data, really. but we're only taking one census for one part of their data set, so probably not too bad. And actually, if you're using Ancestry, you want to chase that family connection back over multiple census returns. But yeah, I don't think Ancestry would want to release that data to us for us to plug into Know Your Place. Much as that'd be great.
Who was the person who did that project in Gloucester, Pete, about? Was it World War One? They mapped out all of the... That was a volunteer, wasn't it? They kind of... Because we did that as a bulk upload, I think, didn't we?
Yeah, so there are times that people have done... they've actually done, using their own free access GIS, they've actually built a GIS layer at home with the research they've done online or at the archives, wherever it might be. And then they've been able to provide that as a data set to Know Your Place to actually plug in as a layer straight in. So whereas the 1881 census layer is gradually being developed and built up by that volunteer, other people have done those, that they've actually gone live with a layer once it's in a complete format. So if you look at the Gloucester version of Know Your Place, there's a lovely World War One layer on there, which was the result of this volunteer working remotely using the archives, and each poppy on the map will link through to the story about that individual who was in the First World War, and as it's essentially like a war memorial as a layer.
Yeah, there's huge potential, isn't there, for those kind of individual life stories, I suppose, when we're talking about life stories, but yeah, certainly sort of thematic sort of content like that. I just wonder whether it might be helpful. Celia. Sorry, Celia. Missed you there.
Are we able to upload things on YouTube? Because there's lots on YouTube about Worcester Railway.
Yeah, that's one of the new developments we've had with Know Your Place in a recent refresh. It's got URL fields within the data now. So if there is a YouTube film or any online resource, you can put that URL into the form that you're filling in to upload the data onto Know Your Place. So when you click the point, go through to the further information, that link to YouTube will be there, and it will take you to that film. So yeah, and it works.
Yeah. Just as an example of that, Celia, you may already have seen our Memories of the Shambles video that we produced, and that's something that we'd want to make available in that way. So that would sit as a point in the middle of the shambles in the city centre on the map, and you'd be able to click on that, and it would bring up the link to the YouTube video. So it will be there in perpetuity, we hope.
In many ways, the best way to do it is the data is then stored in the cloud, and you're just doing the link to that existing data rather than duplicating the data and so it ends up clogging up servers. It's a much better way to do it that way. And the same for the audio files, potentially, is storing them onto SoundCloud or somewhere and providing a link to that SoundCloud file in Know Your Place. So Know Your Place just has the link to that resource.
Yeah. And anyone else want to come in there? I've got a list of a few suggestions, but Karen, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah. That you can have lines as well as points, as on the layers of the map.
We have done. We have done lines.
Yeah, I was thinking that coming back to censuses, somebody, as somebody who's sort of doing stuff on family history, when you try and work out enumerators' routes on the censuses, it would be very handy if you could make plots of that, and if one person had done it and could upload it, it would save other people having to sort of try and work it out themselves. I mean, as Sheena knows, I've had a look at some of the stuff on the butts in Worcester, and I got myself in a terrific muddle on the trying to look at the censuses on there, because there were bits that were in the butts at some stage and weren't, and just working out which properties equated to others was quite difficult. But that would be more of a linear thing than a point thing.
Yeah, we have got. We in Bristol don't have any line data on our site. There is line data on the Bath version of Know Your Place because they wanted some of their historic environment record data sets that was line data that has been put in there. We generally have polygons. So our listed buildings, for instance, are on there as polygons. And there's other bits of historic environment record data which has gone in as a polygon. And sometimes the polygons actually work better than the line on the layers. But there's no reason why a data set gone in couldn't be a line data set.
Thanks for that, Karen. That's an interesting one. Any others before I take to my list and see what people think of it? Now, bearing in mind, I should actually try and sort of manage the sort of expectations of this, because there's a limited amount of I suppose development that we can do, but I do have a wish list, and I'm sure everyone else does as well. And there are a number of things that people have raised over the last few weeks. One of them was around whether we could have a layer that covered key historic events, which I thought was quite an interesting one. So things that the examples that they've used are things like when the canal was opened, when the railway was opened, and things like that. And I think that's probably quite a good one to throw into the mix. I suppose that might be something actually it would be something that would be covered potentially by HER monument records as well. So it's just how we present that, I think, via the layers. Some more specific archive records that people have talked about are Worcester Evening News Archive. So that's certainly something that we could explore with them. We've got some good connections, haven't we, Tash, with some of the feature editors at the Worcester News. So potentially that could be something we could look at. Another one was the history of Worcester's parks and public spaces, which certainly that would feed into sort of the potentially the nature pack as well for Worcester Life Stories platform. But yeah, certainly we've got information on the public parks around the city. In fact, we've got one that's a listed park as well. So those will certainly form part of that. Someone else talked about potential for recording famous visitors to Worcester, and maybe sort of linking in with old film footage. That could be something we could look at. There's it's called MACE, and I can never remember what the acronym is. The Midland something Force. It's something to do with film footage, anyway. I'm glad I know that. And then other people have talked about things like Worcester scouting activities, so including a layer about scouts, music, so different musical performances in the city. I know we've talked a lot in some of our kind of media releases and things about the Gaumont Theatre and acts that performed there, and we had everyone there, the Beatles, Queen, Jimi Hendrix, so lots of big names, and whether we could actually include sort of a layer about music in the city. And obviously we've got that tradition of three choirs festival as well. So there are lots of ideas coming out of that. I don't know, there's a few more ideas there to whet people's appetite. Is there any response to any of those? Any of those sound like a good idea? Things that we've missed?
This is Sue.
Hi, Sue.
I like the idea about the parks, and I also wondered if we could have an area of interest as the river, the way the river has impacted on the development of the city. For instance, when it was a port, and when that stopped becoming tidal, it had a big impact on the way the city itself developed.
Yeah,
that's come up so much. The Worcester Life Stories platform, it really fits in terms of what you said about nature, and I think it's even more so during the current pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good one, Sue. Again, some of that comes through from the monument records within the historic environment record. So again, I think there's there's definitely a real push to work the HER material into the site. And I think also if there are areas of interest that people would be keen to explore and research and potentially share the results of that research as well, that would be fantastic. So there's lots of opportunities there to volunteer if people wanted to have a go at that. And please do just drop us a line if you can see ways that you could feed into that side of things. Certainly, Glyn Harding is looking to encourage what he's calling sort of sports champions. So particularly having someone for each different sport within the city that could lead on gathering material for that. I know obviously we've got lots of sort of activity in the city around football and rugby and cricket, golf. I mean, I'm probably missing some major ones there. The race course, rowing. So. There are certainly areas there where people could get involved as well. I'm just looking at the chat here. Sorry, what finally is? Is there a way to? Yes. Is there a way to moderate entries? Thanks, Jen. Yeah. So, Pete, do you want to talk a little bit about how that works, moderation?
Yeah. So I should have pointed that out really probably very beginning, because it's one of the most important things about Know Your Place is having that level of moderation on there, so you don't get stuff that doesn't fit or stuff that's abusive and all those sorts of things. So I moderate everything that goes on the Bristol version of Know Your Place. I moderate that. Sheena or someone will be responsible for Worcester. If something is incorrect, we have had people then adding another point saying this is the correct information, so update it update it to this refreshed data set, if you like. So yes, it does work like that. It's always intended to work in exactly that way, as a kind of thing. Just coming back on some of the points you made, Sheena, about the kind of content that could go on there. We've really used the community layer as a catch-all. So most things will go into the community layer anyway. And it's only when a significant amount of information around a certain theme would that then end up going onto another layer. The bulk of the layers on Know Your Place are derived from collection. So in the archives, there'll be a certain collection. So a postcard collection, that ends up being its separate layer because it's a discrete collection within the archives. Other kind of thematic things that you've just been talking about, Sheena, in terms of, say, sporting, that could sit in the community layer quite comfortably. And it's only when you start to get a big amount of material, suddenly go, well, actually, this is worthy of its own layer. That would then be for everyone to decide, okay, we think this qualifies as being worthy of another layer. Or not worthy, but kind of it's sufficient enough to say this should be a separate layer. When early on, we actually set out a specific layer on historic cinemas, because there's loads of stories around cinemas. You start oral history collections. One of the things that people will talk about is the war. They'll talk about their school, growing up in a school, and they'll talk about their leisure activities, particularly going to the cinema. And so we started to build this historic cinema layer with the idea that it was going to link into this app that someone was developing about historic cinemas. But we soon realized, or it still is on Know Your Place, actually, those cinemas are in the historic environment record as monuments anyway. And so that layer is duplicated what is in the HER. And so in a way, the way it should have worked is the cinemas are in the HER as monuments, and then you link in to that HER data. So the same would go in possibly for the parks, though possibly different for parks. But we have those parks as monuments in the HER, both polygons and points. And then if you were doing a project about the history of parks, so in the Worcester Life Stories project, you have history of a particular park, it would then link to the point on Know Your Place so people know where it is and what you're talking about. So it's just to bear that in mind about what layers you build onto that resource, not to duplicate the data if you don't have to. And if it can be done in the community layer, do it in the community layer, because that is then kind of all inclusive and there's equity in that, and it could be a way to go for a lot of those data sets. But that's something to work through as you're developing the project, just to bear that in mind, really. There's another question here.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Yeah, so there was a further point that Jen was making there around whether we can comment on other people's entries, or would you have to create your own?
Yeah, and we don't have a comment facility on there. In a way, something like that would work better if you got the life stories and you got the blog entries in the Worcester life stories. A blog facility would work better in that way. If you like the layer on Know Your Place, it's almost like the current definitive version, if you like, but you have comments and discussions on another platform. Know Your Place isn't set up to be a conversation platform in that way, and it really WordPress and those sorts of things, it's better set up for those approach. And when we did Know Your Place West, that's exactly how it was set up. That had its own blogs and discussion forums there.
Yeah, sorry, I think I meant it more in being able to comment, just point out that what someone had written wasn't quite your memory of something, rather than having a discussion as such. It was more, raising a particular point and so on. But I got your point about the blogs, yeah.
We have got a bit of that. There is occasional someone will say in their description of a particular point or an event, they might come at it from a different angle and make a different point about these things, but it hasn't really become a discussion necessarily. When you think of this, I was looking today, there's nearly, in all those collections, there's nearly 17,000 points on Know Your Place in all those different layers now. And so I find that a bit mind-boggling in itself, just to think about each one of those points. If you have a discussion about all those different things, it would just get completely out of control. So it already is a bit out of control.
Thanks, Pete. Sorry, carry on, Tash.
I think your knowledge about how the two platforms can interact a bit more in terms of knowing that would be really helpful, isn't it? In terms of helping shape some of my thinking when you say about what it looks like and how to make it accessible for people. I'm thinking especially for people that are, as you and Sheena were talking earlier, perhaps not as familiar with, or who have cognitive difficulties, so like people living with dementia, how you access that in a way. There was just some things that you'd said that I just thought would be really helpful for us to think about, really. So thank you.
I think a lot of it, that's why I talk about the story maps, because for me, the development of story maps has been a fantastic innovation from Esri, the software providers, to develop this thing. And that allows you, as I described, to cut through that data along thematic lines. And that's essentially what you're doing with Worcester Life Stories, which I think is a fantastic thing. And that is where, if you think about your users, your audience, for most people, that's what they will want. They will want to tell me all about the history of that river. What difference has the river in Worcester made to the history of the city? And they'll just want to see it in one. They won't want to fish around, so to speak, from point to point on the map. They'll just want to see that and it laid out in a narrative with videos, oral histories, and those sorts of things. So almost like a documentary, online documentary about the river of Worcester will be a fantastic thing. It would sit on Worcester Life Stories. It could have a point of entry at Know Your Place, but the main content will be on Worcester Life Stories. That's how I see it, and that's how those story maps are playing out for us. I'm ranting now.
No, they're really helpful. There's another point there from Karen. I really like this actually, Karen, around is there much in the way of authors from Worcester or places in Worcester mentioned in novels, maybe something that could get local book clubs to work on? Yeah, and yeah, we know of a lot of sort of references to Worcester and in various sort of. I went through a phase in my teens of reading 19th century novelists that were in some way associated with Worcester, which, is a little bit niche, but that was my teens. So we've got quite a few authors from that time that write about Worcester and write about specific places. And we've also got sort of travel authors going back through the years, which actually are a really useful source for describing how Worcester was at different points in the sort of 17th and 18th centuries and things. things. So that's actually that could actually be quite a nice layer of information in its own right, actually capturing sort of literary references and things, and it brings in another kind of dimension, a bit of sort of literary history. I think I really like that one.
Yeah, that's really nice. We're at the moment we're doing a project about poets in Bristol, so poetry points and points that link to poets and so on. And of course, then a lot of people talk about the film locations. So Bristol's got a lot of film locations, but you can start to look at all these places, how they have been used for different purposes within various different cultural outputs, whether it's film, paintings, poetry, novels, TV. It helps to raise the awareness of the value of the city and these places for all these different purposes.
One thing I did want to ask you about, Pete, I know you've used Know Your Place, a means of people nominating buildings for local listing and that sort of thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's sort of a bit of democracy in action, really, there, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean that's born out of the fact that I always say that because Know Your Place is sitting within the planning department, you add a point onto Know Your Place, you are participating in planning because you are saying there's something of interest here. And so a planner, developer, they then have to take consideration of that point. Because essentially, if it's on the community layer, it's part of the historic environment record, which is part of policy, planning policy. So once you get to that kind of thinking about what that data is sitting on that layer on Know Your Place, and you start to think about, well, okay, we've got the national list, listed buildings, scheduled monuments, these sorts of things. What about those bits of the neighbourhoods that people value but haven't reached the criteria to make it of national importance? How can we actually give that a little bit more recognition? So we set about creating a local list, and the local list, the nominations for things to go on the local list comes through Know Your Place, through the community layer. So when you're looking at our version of Know Your Place, you'll see green diamonds, but you'll also see blue diamonds. And those blue diamonds are assets that have been nominated for the local list. And it then goes through a process of assessment against criteria and so on and so on. And if it comes through that and it gets selected, it ends up on our local list. But it's all derived from members of the public uploading things to Know Your Place.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Pete. Yeah, it's a really interesting approach. And I know that local lists are certainly something that are being looked at the moment nationally. And certainly within our team at the City Council, that we're looking at that side of things. We've got quite a relatively comprehensive list for Worcester, actually, but obviously there are always things that have been missed. So it's really good to have that opportunity for people. Thank you. Celia. Roger was first. So the hive as many books which could feed into the Know Your Place. Is a long-term result being that the content of old books is transferred such that access to libraries is less of a constraint. I mean, I suppose, this kind of resource is opening up access to those sorts of things. I suppose what our limitation is what is available digitally. But certainly, you're sort of adding in those links to resources and potentially opening up those. And I know Google have obviously done a lot of work on, you've got Google Books, haven't you, where there's a lot of resources available via Google now. So that could always be links that are added into the data layers, certainly. And then Celia, is it worth looking at healthcare in Worcester? Yeah, Charles Hastings of the British Medical Association, I think it was, wasn't it? Through to Hillborough Workhouse that became the maternity unit in the 1940s. Yeah, so to answer that, Celia, certainly a lot of those records form part of the historic environment record. So a lot of the monuments associated with healthcare in Worcester, the first infirmary building in Silver Street, through to the I was going to call it the modern the modern hospital in Castle Street, but that's not the modern hospital anymore. That shows how long I've been in Worcester, doesn't it? But yeah, certainly those as monuments are there and recorded in the HER, so those would pull through as part of that data layer. There's always more enhancement work to be done, so you know, if you're doing any research on that, yeah, be really pleased to see it. Okay. Sorry,
it's a really good. Sorry, me. So it's a really good example, though, Celia, of it, that sort of cutting through the data, because that particularly around healthcare, because actually health and well-being. I mean, we talked about this before, Sheena. Health and well-being is a driving factor within planning as a whole, and a lot of time people don't see that. I mean, that building plan you showed earlier, Sheena, that comes out of the Sanitation Act of the mid-19th century. That's why they've done that building plan. And the Sanitation Act, that leads through to the modern planning concepts. That's the first planning legislation, really, that Sanitation Act. And it's all connected with all that running theme through health and well-being, which is a lot of what you're doing with Life Stories. So again, it's that through the data to reveal those themes, to reveal those stories.
And absolutely, and actually, that initial session we did, Tash, with some of the service users up at the hospital site, we looked at healthcare sites around the city. So actually pulling that together, and I mean, that works really well as a story map, as Pete's been suggesting for the theme. So yeah,
but you know, you did do that. It was a brilliant session.
And I think having those sort of themed sort of approaches, like you said, Pete, really does make that sort of information a lot more accessible. Sue says, "What is the timeline? The timeline for developing the maps and the data?" Well, we're sort of working on it. Paul has been interviewing developers this week, so it's all in the offing. We haven't got a fixed date as yet. We've had a few delays in terms of actually being able to recruit and I think COVID has had a bit of an impact for us there. But over the next few months, and we'll certainly keep you updated with sort of key milestones for that, certainly. But it is on its way.
Yeah.
Just before.
Gina, can you hear me?
Yes, Roger. Hi.
Right. I wasn't trying to digitise and copy Google. I was rather more thinking about trade directories, electoral rolls, newspapers even, where the landlords, you could track all the landlords for one pub, for instance, which saves people going through all the archives by going to the location itself.
Yeah, certainly, Roger. I think it's where those resources exist as sort of digital material, really, and how we facilitate that happening. So it's certainly something that we can look at and look at the opportunities for linking up with other projects that are doing those sorts of digitisation works as well. So yeah, certainly. Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. Just before we sort of move on to sort of looking at the supporting resources and the kind of guidance materials, as Pete sort of touched on in his initial talk, I just wanted to check whether we were missing anything in terms of mapping and what sort of maps and things people might like to see, because obviously we've got our we're going to have a modern base map that enables people to navigate around Know Your Place. Then we'll have those first edition 1880s maps as well, and then the 1940s ones. But does anyone have any kind of a sort of burning desire to see any particular maps on there that we haven't already sort of identified as kind of key ones? We've got it right, clearly. No, I mean, obviously, you know, the conversation is still ongoing. So if there are resources or maps and things that you would like to see, do come back to us and email us and let us know, because, you know, we can't promise to include everything, but we can certainly have a look at it and see what's feasible. So, thank you for feeding in all those suggestions. Okay, so if we just wanted to have a look then at the kind of the guidance material for the last few minutes of the session, I just wanted to get people's feeling on, I don't know, how well that's covered with the Know Your Place West material that Pete showed us briefly earlier. I know I sent the link out for people to have a look at that if they had chance. Or if you haven't, do people have any ideas about the sorts of guidance that would be helpful for accessing Know Your Place? How long's your video, Pete?
You've heard how much I waffle on, so it's probably about anything. But I think it's about 10 minutes. I think.
Were you thinking just whether it would be useful to
watch a little bit? And Pete, I'm sorry that I'm asking because I haven't properly looked at the guidance. I know sometimes time goes, and you have a lovely voice. It'd be lovely to hear your or see you. If other people would find that helpful, I don't know. I was just thinking.
Would that be helpful to do? Have a look at that and see whether we think we're covered.
I would say people do that in their own time rather than watch it on here. I would suggest, but I think that although the video covers the basic kind of like navigation on the site, click this and scroll here and zoom out. What it doesn't cover, I don't think, and it's something you do need to cover in the literature, is appropriate to go onto the site in a way. So if someone is uploading